December 13th, 2022. And we'll do roll call.
All right, Chairman Beecham.
Here.
Vice Chair Straubing.
Here.
Board Member Cadwallader.
Here.
Board Member Fonger.
Here.
And note that Board Member Crawford is currently not here, but he is downstairs.
He's downstairs taking a phone call, so he'll be a couple minutes. By the time we get through with this, I'm sure he'll be here.
Yep, I hear him coming.
So I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
I'll support.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the minutes. We have two of them. For the regular November 15th, our regular board meeting, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I motion to approve the minutes as written.
Okay? And support?
Support.
Okay, we have motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. November 15th, 2022, closed session. Entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Let it be known at 6:03, Daniel is here. Public comment. Any public? There's no one in the audience. I don't know if we have a couple employees here, anything?
All good.
Okay, then we'll move on to action items. The first action item is a 5-year cost of service update, rate plan review, and potential adoption of the new electric rates. Mark Beauchamp is attending virtual remotely, and I'll turn it over to Charlie.
All right, yeah, so before Mark starts, just wanted to give a little context. Obviously, the board's aware that over the last several months, staff's been working with Utility Financial Solutions on a 5-year cost of service study update and a 5-year rate plan. As we've spoken about over the last year, we've been faced with quite a few challenges this year and industry disruptions, which have definitely impacted the 5-year rate plan. But when we were developing the rate plan and looking at adjusting rates, we definitely took into consideration the financial impacts to the customers, but we also focused on long-term financial stability of the utility and continued in being able to continue the necessary investments into the reliability. Mark will join us and present the findings of the study and then also propose some rate plans. But just for a little bit of context, we will touch on it in more detail next month. But every year, MPPA conducts a business model risk assessment where one component of that is a competitiveness study where they take our customer classes and apply it to our competitors' rates. And the most recent study that they did, which was just completed, indicated that we are currently 32% cheaper than our surrounding competitor at the residential level, 22% cheaper for the average commercial customer, and 10% cheaper for the average industrial customer. So that'll give a little bit of context as we look to make rate adjustments and plan out the next 4 to 5 years in terms of rates. So with that,
Well, one question,
Yes.
because you'd said talk about it in the next meeting, but I thought we're looking to adopt this.
I'm sorry,
Tonight.
the rest of the business model risk assessment, Steve Donkersloot's going to join us for a presentation from MPPA's business model risk assessment. The rate competitiveness is just one aspect of that.
Okay.
So I invited him in to give a board presentation next month on the full business model risk assessment, but I did want to highlight just that one component because it's relative to our
But we're
rate discussion.
looking to adopt this
Yes,
tonight.
following the presentation, it will be staff's recommendation to adopt the electric rates proposed in your board packet. So we will ask for consideration and a potential vote tonight on those rates.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess one other thing, the charter does require that our electric rates sit for 30 days before they can be active. So rate action today would allow us to bill the updated rates starting in January. So it would not be for the bills that are produced at the end of December. It would be half a fiscal year. So with that, Mark, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you for allowing me to do the cost of service study, or us to do the cost of service study update. The last time we did the full cost of service study, I believe, was 2017. So it's been, like 5 years. And what you're going to see is some changes. And of course, everything's changing all over the country. To give you an example of that, we do a lot of work in the Northeast. And, we've had to increase rates. This one utility we work for, because their power costs are changing so dramatically in that area. We're kind of fortunate in Michigan. We don't see quite the changes, but we are seeing changes. We had to increase rates about 20% last year in May, and then another 20% this year for the power supply costs. One of the investor-owned utilities, Evergreen, they're proposing a 40% rate increase to take effect at the beginning of the year. So what you're going to see is some changes and some recommendations. Lowell Power in total is a financially stable utility, but there are some weaknesses, and right now that we want to try to address. And we'll go through that. What we've done as part of the study is we did a long-term, a 5-year financial projection to look at certain key financial targets, such as debt coverage ratio. We don't want to be in violation of any bond covenants, so we review that to make sure we're above it. We look at minimum cash needed for the utility, and that's what's driving our recommendations today. Our cash balances are falling substantially below our recommended minimums. And the third target we look at, which we consider almost more of an upper boundary, is what we call a target operating income, which is really nothing more than the inflationary increase in the replacement cost of assets. Because when you invest in assets, you're trying to set money aside, theoretically, to eventually replace those assets. But every year the replacement cost of those assets increase. And we've seen substantial changes in cost of transformers and wire over the past couple of years. Though it's really difficult to get transformers, and if you can, the prices have almost doubled. Then we also did a cost of service study. And what a cost of service study is it identifies how much it costs to provide service to each class. We look at things like who's driving the system peaks for power supply. We do that through what's called load research information to identify how much each class is using at the times of your transmission peaks and your power supply demand peaks. We also look at each class's impact on the distribution infrastructure to allocate a certain amount of distribution recovery to each class in a manner that is fair and equitable. And then what you're going to see in this PowerPoint is the results of the cost of service study and also the recommended rate adjustment plan. Now, even though we did a 5-year financial projection, what we're requesting from the board is only 1 year of rate adjustments. The intent is to look at the financial piece of this next year to see if our recommended rate adjustments or rate tracks are still needed, or if they should be modified either up or down. So we'll be looking at that again toward the end of next year. But we're proposing or requesting the board for approval of 1 year's worth of rate adjustments. So with that, before I get into the actual modeling, is there any questions about the work that we did?
I only have one. So if we're looking, this is a 5-year plan, if we're looking at 1 year and then we're coming back and looking at another year, is that included in our initial cost for this service? Or is it an additional cost a year from now? And then is it another additional cost another year from now?
So I can take that, Mark. So what we've discussed with Mark and Mike is when we set the onset, or on the onset of this, the 5-year rate plan is a 5-year plan, but the actual rates being developed, we will engage UFS on an annual basis and we have in the past. So for the last 5 years, we engage them on an annual basis to produce the actual rate documents and the rate calculations on an annual basis. With the volatility in the market this year, or not this year, but with that we're experiencing now, the plan will be to re-engage them at a deeper level on an annual basis, annually. Part of that will be an annual update to the 5-year financial outlook. And then also that will serve as the basis for, do we stay on the same rate track, the same 5-year rate track? And if the answer is yes, then they will produce the rates for the board's consideration this time next year. And then every year moving forward, that's the way we'll engage them from a financial review standpoint and a rate design standpoint. We had the option of having them develop multiple years worth of rates and passing multiple years worth of rates at this meeting, but the board provided feedback to say, no, we'd rather do that on an annual basis.
Okay.
That way we've got the opportunity to pivot.
I was going to say, didn't
adjust.
we vote on this
Yeah.
earlier this year to,
Yeah.
this is,
So did that cover it pretty accurately from your side too, Mark?
Yeah, yes, it did. Yeah, I just want to point out one more thing about that, though. We're not updating the cost of service study every year. We're only updating the financial modeling and the rate design, which is a lot easier part. The cost of service is more involved. And that is, we already have that done. And any future rate adjustments, we would look at the previous cost of service study to identify how that rate adjustment should be split between the classes. Okay. I do want to mention, one of the things I kind of jumped right into this, and I think most of you are familiar with the company, but if you're not, or if you just as an update, Utility Financial Solutions was started in 2001, and we do financial planning, cost of service studies for electric, water, wastewater, gas, solid waste, telecommunication, utilities. And we teach cost of service courses for several different agencies around the United States, including the American Public Power Association, the Institute of Public Utilities in Lansing, American Water Works, we teach more at a regional level for them, and the American Gas Association. We've done work in 44 states around the U.S., as well as several Caribbean islands and the islands of Guam, Barbados, and Bermuda. We've done well in excess of 1,000 electric cost of service studies since we started the company in 2001. And one of the things, Lowell was actually my first client, and that was when I was doing work for Virtual Crossing Company or Baker Tilly. And so Lowell is kind of special to me because you were my very first client that gave me a chance back in 1998. So I just wanted to state that and emphasize that. So, sorry I didn't start off with that introduction. I also have Mike Johnson on the call with us today. Mike was the manager of the project, and he did most of the detail work. We also have a staff person or a rate analyst that helped Mike with a lot of the work that was done, that you're going to see the results of. So now, to get back into the PowerPoint and the modeling, this slide talks about assumptions that were made in the development of the 5-year financial plan. And of course, whenever you build look into the future, you have to base it on certain assumptions. And the first assumption that we based it upon is inflation right here. We assumed that, right now inflation over the last 12 months is about 7.1%. We assumed it's going to stay high through 2024 at 5%, and then drop back to more normal levels after 2025. I think over the last 10 years it's averaged around 2.2%, but we're assuming 3% inflation rates for the 4 years after that. We assumed a modest growth rate for Lowell, about 0.5% a year. Purchase power cost changes. We assumed a 1% increase in 2024, followed by 3% increases annually in 25 through 28. Now, you do have a power cost adjustment mechanism, so those would be picked up by the power cost adjustment and does not have a direct impact on any rate action necessary for the board because it's a direct pass-through. Then the capital improvement plan. We assumed a capital improvement plan of about $1 million a year. And these are the significant assumptions that the model was based upon. And the model produced the following results. Now, if you look over on the right, it says projected, before I move on, is there any questions on these assumptions?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, good. Now, this financial model is the results without any rate adjustments. So I want the first target that I mentioned to start with is debt coverage ratio. And when you issue debt, they're typically what's called revenue bonds. And revenue bonds come with a bond ordinance and bond covenants that you have to meet or exceed on an annual basis. These covenants typically specify a 1.2 coverage ratio, and I'll explain in detail in the next slide how it's calculated. And because electric sales are so dependent on weather, our minimum target is 1.4, and the reason we target our at 0.2 is one, because of the variability of sales, but two, if we violate that bond covenant, we're in technical default on the debt. Not that somebody's going to come knocking on our door demanding payment, but it will affect our debt rating and subsequently could increase our interest rates in the future. So we want to maintain your coverage of at least a 1.4 or above. The second target we look at is cash reserves. And this is what's driving a lot of our recommendations. We're projecting that 2024, without any rate changes, your cash reserves will drop to around $2 million or 84 days of cash. Our recommended minimum is about 3.2 million or about 140 days cash on hand, which is in the ballpark of most utilities. It's usually in that 120 to 150 or 160 days cash on hand minimum. And so you can see we're quite a bit below the 3.2 million. And you can see that in 2027, our cash reserves are projected to actually go negative to $297,000. So that's the second target. And as I mentioned, debt coverage ratio and cash reserves, those are our minimum targets. In other words, we want to make sure we exceed that minimum cash, that we exceed that minimum coverage. Now, we do have an upper boundary, and the upper boundary is what we call a target operating. And even though we're a non-for-profit utility, we have to make money to break even. The reason we have to make money to break even is when we put infrastructure in service, say $1 million asset with a 20-year life, every year that asset gets depreciated $50,000 a year. And so let's say theoretically we set that $50,000 aside to replace the asset. So after 20 years, we have recovered $1 million to replace that asset. But every year the replacement cost of that asset goes up. So what the target operating income represents is the inflationary increase in the replacement cost of the infrastructure. And we use the Handy Whitman Index to determine that. And we use a 20-year rolling average to determine that inflation number. Now you can see the target operating income, the upper boundary, is about $700,000 to $800,000. And we're looking at operating losses each year. In 2024, we're about 18 million. And every year the losses are getting worse. And in 2028, projected at a negative $400,000. So this is our base case before we do any rate changes. Now, before I move on and talk about our recommended rate track and some of the detailed calculations on these targets we have, is there any questions about this projection?
How many days of cash are we sitting at in reality right now?
Reality right now, we will report in February, but Megan, we're actually sitting at, we finished the fiscal year much higher than we originally projected and presented to the board. We're sitting at right around 119 days of cash right now. We anticipated finishing the year closer to 105 days, and I think some of that's probably some timing related things. I think the actual, a more true number would be closer to 110. So we're looking at right now, and these are based through the model. Obviously, if we saw issues, we would make cuts and we would make adjustments inside the year. But that has impacts on how we operate as a utility. That has impacts to reliability or continued investment. There's always the other side of that coin. But right now, with the way that things are working, we're looking, our numbers would agree that we're looking at eroding, if nothing changes, between 15 and 20 days of cash every year moving forward. That's why we're...
What's our track record been like over the past several years? How many days of cash do we average per year?
It fluctuates. We put it,
I'm gonna say that I did a graph on that.
honestly, I'm not sure what board packet that was in. I can track that down, but it's fluctuated because we paid for the regulators, the gas regulator station on the end of the building. That was about $750,000 that was paid cash. So our cash reserves, we'll see. I don't necessarily, the historic average isn't necessarily relevant because of $1 million abnormal expense.
Right.
But our cash reserves are lower than they've been. Right now, they're lower than they've been in probably the last 5 years. So we're looking to, and they were slowly chipping away year over year over the last 5 years even. I think it's been a little bit of a downward trend, nothing that has been alarming, and then the massive disruptions over the last 18 months really had a bigger impact.
Yeah, and we need to change that tide.
Yeah. And Mark will present a path, and I'll reference some previous conversations where we've talked about lost connection. 20 28 minutes in, makes no sense.
They
So
still there though?
What do I?
Go up to the more and look for settings. There'll be,
Device,
call me. Which, that bottom one will work.
There we go.
Told you.
Megan?
Oh, sorry about that, Mark. Oh, you there, Mark?
That's okay.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what happened.
I'm here.
That may happen again. But I was just talking to the board about, we've laid out, and one of our strategic goals was to lay out a 5-year plan to basically recover our cash, and then set our current policy reads that we are required, or we have we will maintain 120 days of operating cash right now. The target is, Megan and I have been talking about, we had a target of between 135 and 140 days of cash. That gives us that sufficient cushion. That would give us that sufficient cushion to meet our power supply bill needs, but also if we had a year, it would give us enough cushion so major disruptions would still result in a end of fiscal year cash balance that exceeded that 120-day minimum.
Kind of consistent with what you said, Charlie, is if you look at the projected cash balances right here, your days cash on hand, you're in a cash burn situation, and it's declining about 30 days cash each year. So, and that's what we want to try to reverse. Is there any other questions on this? And I'll get into the details of each of the financial targets.
Yeah, I guess I have a question, Mark. This is Andrew. So what's the biggest driver of like the negative trend, right? I get that rate adjustments of 0 are like, not a realistic thing, but I guess thinking back to the previous slide, which of those assumptions are kind of driving? Is it the inflation? Is it the purchase power? Or I guess what kind of drives that like negative if we don't take action type of a?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that Charlie kind of hit on it a little bit earlier. Is over the last couple of years, you spent a bit more on your capital, which drove your cash reserves down over here. So your capital plan was driving your cash down. Now, there are several factors. Obviously, inflation is one of them. It has an impact, but I wouldn't say it has a substantial impact, but it does impact. Purchase power has an impact to a limited degree. And the reason I say a limited degree is you have a power cost adjustment mechanism in your rates, but it's the 6-month rolling average that's used. And the reason we put in a 6-month rolling average is to try to minimize any month-to-month variations in purchase power cost impacts to customers. So it kind of smooths it out. So power costs rise, the purchase power costs go up, but don't jump dramatically in any month. And so as a result of that, there's a lag between when you purchase the power and then you actually get the money back from your customers. It almost takes, I don't want to say it takes a full 6 months, that would be unrealistic, but it's going to take a few extra months. So let's do with that, because of the increase in power supply cost, it's driving down your cash reserves. And it will recover at some point in the future, but if purchase power costs stay high, that lower cash balance will probably maintain close to what it is. When we built the model, we did adjust and brought back into your cash that timing difference from like 2022 because we had unrecovered power supply costs and rolled it into 23. I'm probably getting deeper than what you want to know, but it's a combination of a lot of things, from the capital plan, the purchase power cost increases, and the inflation.
But our purchase power, we're in a pretty good place there because we do have most of everything is under long-term contracts, right? And there's just a sliver of it that we're buying on the daily market, but it is significant.
Our firm power contracts are not firm rates, they're ownership entitlements.
Okay.
And ownership entitlements are subject to other market volatility.
Okay.
So price of coal has gone up, environmental compliance associated with coal has gone up, natural gas costs have gone up, so.
And our largest supplier, Campbell, is in the process of decommissioning.
Yeah. So yes, we do have a lot, but we saw, last fiscal year, we saw $1 million increase year over year in our power supply. And it went from like a $4.1 million expense to a $5.1 million expense year over year. And the majority of that was tied up in ownership entitlements, not the market purchases. But market purchases have been very detrimental to our overall cost of power as well.
So when you mentioned about the extra capital improvement spending, wouldn't that somewhat offset the, what's the name of the third column on the next slide? The
Operating target.
Yeah, the
operating
target,
income?
yeah, the target operating, because if we're spending extra now on some capital, you'd think that would kind of help offset some of those, like the system maintenance aspects. And they reduce the depreciation or what have you. I assume that's factored in, but I guess.
Yeah, it increases depreciation. Maintenance costs, some of that is variable, you're correct. But a lot of your costs related to maintenance is also fixed.
True, yeah.
Especially related to like labor costs. Now, that's part of the reason why when we do these targets, we consider the target operating income more of an upper boundary, not an absolute, where debt coverage ratio and cash reserves are more critical.
Okay. Cool, thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Is there anything else on this summary? The next 3 slides, I'm going to cover some of the detail of how these targets are established. So the first one is debt coverage ratio. And debt coverage ratio does not take into account capital spending. What it looks at is the cash that's generated through normal operations, where for 2024, you can see it's about 768,000 right here. And that cash generated from operations is then divided by your debt service payments. And that ratio is 1.63. And the minimum that we establish is 1.4. And you can see that in 24 and 25, we're above that minimum target. In 2026 and 2027, we fall below it. And then in 2028, we have some debt service falling off. So the coverage ratio increases to 2.89. So that's kind of a temporary thing. That's as far as being below that minimum target. That's part of the reason why I said the cash is really what's generating most of our recommendations. This is a standard debt coverage ratio calculation that's used by rating agencies and is listed in your bond ordinances. The next one, and this is, like I said, the more critical one, is the minimum cash reserve determination. And all utilities have to maintain a certain level of, oh, sorry, was there a question?
No.
Oh, sorry. all utilities have to maintain a certain level of cash because there's a timing difference or working capital needs. And that timing difference is based upon the fact that you may go all through the month of January, paying for labor, materials, supplies, and then at the end of the month, say theoretically, you read all the meters, send all the bills out the first week of February. You don't get that money back from customers until the second week of March. So there's that timing difference between when you spend the money and get it back from customers. So we have to make sure you have enough cash in reserves to buffer that working capital leg. And if you look at the first target that we have, or number, it says operation maintenance cost less depreciation. And you see that 12.3%? All that is 45 days working capital lag, which is typical for any utility that bills monthly. It's a 45-day working capital lag. If you took that, divided by 365 days in a year, that's 12.3%. So we take that and we multiply it by your operation maintenance cost. And to get at what working capital lag is needed just for O&M. And that's at $408,000. Then we also look at the working capital lag and purchase power. It's a little bit different of a calculation because we look at your peak power supply cost throughout the year, and we base the purchase power working capital lag on that peak amount because it does fluctuate quite substantially throughout the year. And that calculated at $724,000 down at the bottom right here. I'm going to skip over this one and come right back to it. It's just a historical rate base number. Now, debt service payments. We look at what your highest debt service payment is throughout the year, and we want to keep that in our reserves. That's the $390,000. Then the 5-year capital improvement program. We want to make sure you have enough cash in your reserves to fund the capital plan for that year. So at the beginning of the construction season, we have the cash in our reserves to fund those capital improvement programs throughout the year. That's adding about $1 million, which is your annual capital spend. Now, to come back to this number, historical rate base. Now, one of the things that we try to factor in, and this is more of a subjective assessment, but there's unexpected events that happen to all utilities. They can be catastrophic, like an ice storm or a windstorm that does major damage, or it could be a transformer unexpectedly exploding. And we want to make sure that you have enough cash in your reserves to start the repair and replacement process if some unexpected event were to occur. Now, to determine that amount, we look at your assets and the age of your assets. And we know that the average utility's assets throughout the United States are about 50% depreciated, which makes sense. And if your depreciation percent is below that, you have newer infrastructure. And if it's above that, you have older infrastructure. And when you have older infrastructure, you have more exposure to something unexpected occurring. And when you look at Lowell's infrastructure, it's 56% depreciated, which implies that you have an older infrastructure. So what we do is we take 3% of your historical investment in assets, and we want that set aside to help fund some unexpected event occurring. That's the $699,000. Now, when we add it all up, it comes out to about $3.2 million down at the bottom. And of course, we did that in each year. And of course, the minimum cash calculation does vary each year to some degree, a limited degree. But it's about $3 to $3.5 million each year. So, like I said, this is what's driving most of our recommendations. So I just want to see if there's any questions you have on this calculation that we've done.
I'd like to have just a little commentary right here. I think what you're getting at with some of this is why our capital spend has been elevated in recent years. Over the last 6 or 7 years probably. It was to catch up with some of the aging infrastructure and to ensure reliability. We continue to invest in, as you hear Mark present, from a cash management perspective, we could grow cash by peeling back off of the capital improvement plan, but ultimately we peel off the capital improvement plan, all we're doing is kicking reliability issues down, kicking that can down the road for somebody else to deal with, for us to deal with at a later date. Because if we don't continue to aggressively invest in the system, it will catch up to us, and we'll end up with an aging infrastructure. And some of your utilities with the lowest rates in the country also have done that through failing to maintain reliability, and they have low rates and they have an unreliable old system. There was a very large utility relative vicinity of where I was at previous to here that was dealing with major reliability issues because they couldn't get community support for rate action that would ultimately reinvest back into the distribution system, and that continues to compound, and you end up having ends up having very damaging impact on your overall reliability, which is probably our greatest strength here.
Well, any healthy, sustainable enterprise, I mean, you can't afford not to think long-term. And when you stop doing that, you put yourself at a lot of risk.
So my one question, why would that $1 million capital improvements be growing every year?
That's the same thing.
I mean, as we're getting larger, we're getting more subdivision. I mean, we are landlocked pretty much, but we are getting more infrastructure. Why would we not be looking at $1 million this year, $1.2 million the next year, $1.4 million the next year, $1 million,
Because the rates didn't support it at this point, and I think when we get and part of it is, if you exceed your depreciation on an annual basis, then you should see continued growth in your net plant value. So the target for us has always been to exceed depreciation. $1 million is pretty close. I think it's about 40% over the minimum target. So that $1 million is an elevated number, but one of the things that we would want to do with UFS on an annual basis is to review with the plan of, hey, can we push that limit? Because we're also going to need to push that moving forward some as new load comes online, as our revenues change, as we deviate from some of those assumptions. It will have an impact on the financial model. We'll revisit, and the goal will always be to continue to balance long-term financial stability and continue to, cash management and reinvesting in the grid. So we used $1 million a year for the rate study. The hope will be that we have the ability to maximize that, but for me, that's kind of a pretty good target because it does exceed that. Like I said, I think our depreciation expense is around $700,000 to $750,000 a year.
So wouldn't our percent depreciated be going down if we were over?
Well, that's a great question. I'll explain why it's not. When there's two things that go into that calculation. Like some of that capital investment is to add new infrastructure. Some of it is to replace existing infrastructure. Because our model is not that detailed on this, we don't know the assets that are being replaced. So we're not removing them from the calculation. If we remove, like if that $1 million would just replace existing infrastructure, we would then decrease your accumulated depreciation by that $1 million also. So that would start to reduce your percent plant depreciated. And I know that's not a good answer, but that's the reason why it's increasing, because we didn't really adjust for that piece of it.
So it's kind of assuming that that capital improvement is all like new growth infrastructure, not, you know, replacing existing infrastructure.
If that were the case, then these numbers would be correct. If all of that $1 million was for new infrastructure, then these numbers you're looking at would be correct. It would be, if that $1 million was used to replace existing infrastructure, then our numbers we're showing there are not totally correct, because we should be removing the $1 million from the accumulated depreciation account.
Okay.
Okay. That's a great question, actually. You're probably the first person to ever pick up on that. You must be a CPA or something.
Rocket science.
He's a rocket
Just an
scientist,
engineer.
yeah.
So, okay. Is there any other questions on this calculation?
I think you're good,
Now,
Mark.
this last one that we have, it's not driving our recommendations, but it does point out a few things that are really good for Lowell. One of them, that if you look at debt to equity ratio right here, sorry, I have a hard time seeing my cursor. Your debt to equity ratio is 14%. And what that means is if you look at the net book value of your assets, let's say theoretically, these aren't the right numbers, but let's say it's $100 million. And we look at how much you owe in debt against that $100 million. And you're at 14%. The average utility, electric utility, similar to Lowell, around the United States is about 35%. So you have a better or a lower debt to equity ratio, which tells me that if something major were to occur, then you could always easily issue debt, okay? So now this calculation is really nothing more than if we took your historical investment in assets and we multiplied it by the annual inflation rate according to Andy Whitman, which is about 3.2% annually. Right now it's greater than that, but historically it's about 3.2%. That would produce a target operating income of $669,000 for 2024. Now we assume that to be more of a upper boundary of our target. We don't like to exceed it, because if we exceed that, theoretically we're overcharging our customers. So we try to stay below that number. When you set a rate track, it's not an exact science. And so that's the reason why we create these boundaries, these minimums and these maximums. And then we try to set a rate track to stay between the two. So if you look way down at the bottom, you see 6.5% rate of return. That's if you took the net value of assets and divided, or they took that 669 target operating income divided by your net book value, that would be a rate of return of 6.5%. Now, if you are an investor-owned utility, their targets are usually 9 to 11%. And being that you're a non-for-profit, that target rate of return is 6.5. If you're a newer infrastructure, that target rate of return would be less. If you had an older infrastructure than that 56%, that rate of return would actually be higher. So, but you're at 6.5%, which is kind of, it's in the ballpark. It's a little higher than most, but that's because your system is older. And again, that's an upper boundary. It's not driving any of our recommendations. Is there any questions on this?
All good.
Now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. This is a projected rate track that we put together. And in 2024, we're recommending a 6.5% rate adjustment. And we're doing that to try to get your cash, to reverse the cash burn situation that's occurring. And of course, it's going to take a few years to actually get the cash back up to above that minimum. So if you look at 2024, your projected cash reserves of $2.5 million, a little bit below our recommended minimum of 3.2. In 2025, our cash goes up to about 2.7, almost 2.8. We're still a little bit below. In 2026, it's almost identical. We're at about 3.25, and the recommended minimum is 3.35. So we're real close. And then after that point, we're above that minimum. But these increases are, we're recommending them to reverse that negative cash flow. Now, of course, debt coverage ratio that wasn't a major issue before, although we did have a couple of years where we were below our minimum target of 1.4. But you're a low debt utility, so the coverage ratio with these adjustments, we're way above our minimums. And the target operating income, right now, the way it's calculated, we're slightly below the minimum in 24. Now 25, if we do that 3%, our calculations are on the money, we are slightly exceeding that target. And with the 3% in the subsequent year, we're exceeding it a little bit more. Now, what that implies to me is, this is more of a board decision, and it's more related to
Another 28
Oh, so-
minutes.
It's at a random time.
So just idling out after every 15 minutes or something?
It's odd. It's like, it's not at set times.
Well, it seems like it's been 20 minutes on that.
Hey, Mark, it's us again. We're having, this phone drops out after, so if we're on here in another
It's-
25 to 30 minutes, it's gonna do it again.
It's freezing up here,
Okay.
and it's warm down where you are, and that's the problem.
Yeah. Part of the thing is we want to look at next year is if those 3% adjustments can be offset by additional debt. Of course, that's more of a question for the board. It's kind of expensive to go out and borrow $1 million, especially if you do that with revenue bonds. So, but these are kind of things and plans that we want to discuss further in the next financial plan that we put together. Because we are exceeding that target operating income. But we need to get the cash back. The only other way to get the cash back would be to issue debt. But you can see that right now today, our recommendation is for the 6.5%. That's probably the major question. I mean, we have another question coming up, which is the actual rate design that will achieve that 6.5% adjustment. So is there any questions from the board? Or any concerns about that 6.5%? what you're gonna see in the rate design, it's a little less than $8 a month increase to the average residential ratepayer.
So why would we have a projected increase of 0 for 2027 and 28? Because wouldn't the assumption be that costs are generally going to increase somewhat? I mean, it's hard to say
Well,
how much out then, but still.
Yeah, the reason I'm not increasing in the projection, first of all, I want you to realize when you do a projection, and based on our history, when we look out 1 to 3 years, our modeling is usually pretty close. But when we get out to years 4 and 5, because we're basing these projections on a lot of assumptions, some of those assumptions will materialize, others won't. And so, 27 and 28, that's something I think that we'll get a better picture of in years 25 and maybe in 26 when we update the financial models. But for right now, today, we're looking like we don't really need any increases in those 2 years because our cash is good, our coverage ratio is good, and our adjusted operating income is in good shape.
And I think that highlights the shift in our strategy to re-engage UFS on an annual basis and more frequently is, there's been a period of stability that has made, less disruptions to the assumptions, I would say. I don't know if that's a fair across the board mark, but the stability in the market has definitely aided, but the current environment that we're living in is, I think we're more likely to deviate from some of those assumptions now. So that's one of our adjustments to strategy was to reflect that and why we didn't drill too deep on, those last 2 rate years and really fine tune the model to get that. Our main focus was on stabilizing cash, reinvesting the system, and that really was the 3-year target. But that re-engagement every year will allow us to have better visibility into those further years out and make adjustments as necessary, whether that's rate increases or avoiding rate increases, adding, kind of adjusting the moving parts moving forward.
So it's kind of more like a 3-year plan versus a 5-year plan.
I would say it's a 5-year plan to be reviewed, to do a more detailed review on an annual basis. But I think some of that's semantics, and I could agree with your assessment.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, what I was getting at is it seems like I kind of remember discussing before in various board meetings that there should be kind of the assumption that our rates would always go up every year some amount, because cost of living or whatever generally always goes up. And if we were trying to kind of come up with a 5-year plan, I would think we'd want to at least put something, the assumption that we would increase the rate at something 2027 and 28, like 1% or whatever it would be.
But I think part of
Just
it too. So another thing to consider is that 6.5%, we will recover that money every year.
Right.
It's not a
I know it's-
one-time thing, so I think with the larger front-loaded rate increase, there's a potential to avoid that other strategy, which the typical strategy is, yes, make small incremental increases every year to keep up with natural inflation, but we've had to make such a larger increase on the front end now that it does, I would say, creates less need or less certainty for the need further out.
Right. But I guess being that it's a few years out, maybe it's kind of moot, but I just feel like as far as a plan goes, I wouldn't want to plan on a 0 increase, right? It's just, like, that seems unnatural as well, right? So if you're talking about, there's always a sort of a natural amount of inflation, it seems we wouldn't want to just assume 0 because that means we're going to be eating into our cash during those years, and then the 6th year is going to see a bigger rate increase to catch up.
I guess you could have put
So-
TBD in there or
Yeah.
question mark.
But I guess
Whether what that rate would look like in 27, But I mean, that's not what happened. I mean, in 27, 28, we're way over in cash.
Right.
Way over, so I think that's why under these assumptions, that's why you can just drop it to 0%. Because you don't need to keep building. The whole reason we're doing the whole rate adjustment so big, so quickly is to get cash back up. So once it's up, it's just like, yeah, we would examine it for other reasons then, but right now, we're looking at rate increase just based on cash.
So, okay, so really kind of the goal is just to get back up to 130 days.
Get cash management.
Yeah, the 3.2 million within 3 years instead of waiting for 4 or 5 years to get to that point. Because then that's just being more risky that we don't want to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the longer you delay it, the more you have to get on the tail end to make up for it.
Right. Yeah, the more you push it out, the even more work it takes in the in the following years to kind of catch up again.
Yeah.
Because this is probably the major question to the board. I mean, after this, it's a little bit more of how to implement it, but the major question to the board is, are you comfortable with the 6.5%? I don't want to say if you like it, I don't think anybody would like it necessarily, but I don't think it's going to cause you any major issues. One of the things that we do when we do a rate track, or especially in the rate design, is we try to balance, in a sense, the financial stability of the utility with the rate impacts on customers. And 6.5% is higher than normal for Lowell, but it is still within an acceptable range. Well, you always want to try to avoid our double-digit rate increases. And, utilities that end up having to do that are ones that are hesitant to adjust rates or increase rates. Then, as was stated earlier, the cash balances are in a cash burn situation, and we have to reverse it. So in those situations, that's when we have to have double-digit rate increases. You're not at that point yet, and we're trying to make sure it doesn't happen to Lowell.
Are there any comparisons of what some of these alternate plans could have looked like? Like if we had done, let's say 6% in 2024, would that have required 4% in 2025? Or something, I guess I'm kind of curious how this profile was arrived
I
at.
can show you that. But our major issue, and the reason we settled in on the 6.5 rather than 6, we did run multiple scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And it really focused on that cash balance, because the minimum is 3.2, and even with the 6.5, it's only getting us to 2.5. And
Right.
of course, if we increased that to 79%, we would get to the 3.2 million, and we wouldn't need the increases in 25 and 26. Or at least one of those could probably go away. But we felt that this was a good balance between customer impacts and financial stability.
Okay, yeah, I guess if we have those, comparisons, that would be interesting, because I'm sure that's the first question on a lot of people's mind would be, well, why does it have to be
If
so
you
high
want,
right now? But
I can run those scenarios for you right now on screen.
And I can provide a little commentary there. We went through a pretty detailed exercise where I want to say almost every other, without that large increase in year one, I want to say every other model that we looked at involved taking out debt. And debt to not, I struggle to take out debt for normal capital. So it was either every other model involved debt or reduction in capital spend, and so you end up taking on more debt, and this interest environment was not something that we are comfortable, especially when we cannot leverage right now. It would be highly unlikely to be able to leverage general obligation municipal bonds, so we'd have to go the revenue bond route, which is more costly.
Mhm.
The interest environment's not obviously very favorable, so we set out with a target of not seeking debt. And then we have debt expiring in 2028, we've got a changing power supply. We wanted to make sure we retain that ability to leverage debt for larger capital investments if we need to make a change in the generation department, or there's a substantial project somewhere that involved a very large capital spend. So we've focused on what's it going to take to eliminate debt and to retain our ability to invest back in through normal capital. And what you ultimately did was, we found that we just kicked the can down the road. In subsequent rating, you lose that compounding effect and that stacking. So it just drew out into years 4 and 5, and a lot of the models we showed were, to your point you alluded to, was that cash recovery was drawn out much, much longer, and it just places that risk. We just carry more of that risk for a longer time frame at that point.
Yep.
So that's where we, this wasn't a here's a recommendation. It was Megan and I went Mark and Mike and Jillian, we all sat down and, what if we do this? What if we do this? What if we do this? So it wasn't like they said, here's 7 options to pick from. It was kind of a collaboration of, well, what if we did this? What if we did this? So, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I
A lot
don't.
of hammering out.
There's a little hammering going on.
Yeah, also, I mean, that's the point, is like, I'm not saying I don't, believe in the recommendation we're getting,
Yeah.
right? But I know that any customer, if they were looking at this chart, their first question would be, well, why not make it 6 and then 3.5 the next year? Well, for one, the math doesn't work that way, right? But that's where it'd be nice to kind of show that math, that, hey, if we were to make it 5.5, that means 2023 or 25 has to be 5.5 as well. Or,
So
it'd help to kind of show that picture of that doing,
So I guess
here's what we considered, but this is what works best.
And let me jump in. I would say our ratepayers are concerned with what they're paying. But I don't believe that is the number one issue with low light and power. And when I say issue is,
Yeah, true.
so when you go and talk to somebody and ask them, what's your thoughts of low light and power? The first thing they're gonna say, 9 out of 10, is reliability.
Mhm.
That our power is on.
Yep.
If you go to a competitor, again, we have a cottage out on Murray Lake, so we keep track of it. When they're have an issue and the power's out, and we're on the causeway, whether it's on the end, they're usually out for 4 to 5 to 6 days.
Yep.
So number one is, when you talk to somebody, they're all saying it's reliability. Cost, I would say, is secondary on that list. For us to be a premier utility, I mean, the study shows our rates are greatly lower than our competitors. I'm not one to just raise our rates because we're lower than our competition. I believe that that's what competition does. It creates, and if we can provide power at a greater reduction than our competitors, all the more power to us. But I do believe from this study that, number one, our objective for our customer base is to maintain and continually be more reliable than anybody else around. And with that being said, I believe that, that's the question I had. So if we're, why wouldn't our capital improvements being increased every year? And it's not just capital improvements. It's our staff, it's our administration, it's the company as a whole. And I believe that from this study, utility services, utility financial services or solutions has not let us, we've used them for many, many years, and they have not led us astray, and therefore, you know, we can beat to death, but I just think it's time that we look at what their recommendation is, the 6.5. And again, they have their 3 and 3, you know, again, we're doing this, gonna be doing this on a yearly basis. They're gonna come back and maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 7%, you know. We can't, it's hard to be a fortune teller and know exactly what's going on in the future. But I think, for me, I think we can move forward with this recommendation. For the primary reason, it's reliability. And we want to continue to be reliable, and if you're not, I know we are a nonprofit, but if you're not profitable, your business is not gonna be here. You're gonna, I don't care what you are, if you're not profitable, you're gonna be gone. And what's gonna keep our reliability is this rate adjustment. Nobody likes a rate adjustment, but again, with that being said, we're still gonna be lower than our competition. And we're gonna be, the number one thing is we're gonna continue to be more reliable. And it's because of these things, it's because of the people sitting on the end of the table, Ryan, Megan, our staff. So, that's my speech.
I guess you made a good point too about that. These recommendations really have nothing to do with what competitors charge, right?
It's just a frame of reference, but,
Well, I mean, that wasn't part of their evaluation,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't, hey, we can charge this much because
We'll still be
competitors
lower?
charge even
No.
more. It's like, no, they're just saying, we don't care what the competitors charge. Here's what we think you need to achieve your goals.
yeah, because
So-
our mission is to serve our customers,
Yep.
not, and be fiduciaries of our customers' funds, not do better than the competitor,
Right.
so.
With that, unless there's
With their
more,
board.
I would entertain a motion to accept the recommendation of Utility Financial Solutions.
I move that we accept the proposal from Utility Financial Solutions for our rate increase adjustment.
And do we have,
I'll support.
and we have support. Any further questions?
Was there anything further from Mark?
Maybe, is there another slide, Mark? I think there's 10 total slides, isn't there?
Wow, we're only.
There is,
I'm jumping ahead.
That's okay. That's okay.
We're moving this meeting along.
You know,
know that, it's good to know that the board is in agreement with 6.5%. There's really two areas I just want to cover, and one is the cost of service results, and there were really no major surprises in that. This is the cost of service results, and compared it to what we did 5 years ago, actually the residentials look better today than they did 5 years ago, even though it's showing a 17% increase. And the reason I'm saying that is because when you look at the 7.3% was the increase that would be needed to meet the target operating income, that means that residential is only about 9.5% away from that average. Last time they were like 12, 13% away from it. So we've gotten a little bit closer, and we've done it just by slowly moving the rates closer to cost of service. And one of the major recommendations on top of this is to take that 6.5% and we always put a bandwidth around it, and we're recommending a 2% bandwidth. And what that means is no rate class would see an increase greater than 8.5%, but the minimum increase would be 4.5%. So, of course, when you look at the results here, what that means is residentials would get 8.5, which is, like I said, about a little less than $8 a month on average. And the large customers who get more like the 4.5. And that's the other part of our recommendation, is to continue the process of moving the customer classes closer to cost of service. Now, with that said, what I'm going to go through next is what we propose with a rate design. This slide, I think it's in your board packet,
Yes.
is the average increases for each rate class. So, for example, residentials would see an increase of about 8.5% on average. General service, 7%. Street lighting, 8.5% each. And your large customers anywhere from 4.5% to 5.6%. So they're getting slightly less than the average. And again, it's to move them, all the classes, somewhat closer to cost of service over time. So we're not doing across the board 6.5%. We're using the cost of service to tweak it. Okay? So I know the major ones, and if I was on the board, the major impact I'd be looking at is what are we doing in residential? And this is the residential rate that we're proposing. The monthly customer charge, we're keeping the same. The cost of service study said we're pretty close at $24. As far as the energy rates, what you see is something slightly different. In the past, we had an energy charge, if you look at under current energy charge, 8.5 cents kilowatt hour. What we're doing is we're breaking it apart. We're what's called unbundling our rates into distribution charges and power supply charges. So the distribution charge is 4 cents, which in the past was buried in the 8.5. We're just separating it out. And the energy component's 5.5 cents roughly. For a total all-in energy rate of 9.8 cents, God, that is really inexpensive. Your current rate's 8.6, so you can see it's a little over a penny per kilowatt hour increase. And if you look at this proposed rate design, the average customer in Lowell, I think, uses around 700 kilowatt hours a month.
Pretty close, yes.
Yeah, and so if they were at 250 kilowatt hours, you're only going to see about a 5.5% increase. If you go up to 1,600 kilowatt hours a month, they would see closer to a 10% increase. But the average is at 8.5. And from a dollar impact standpoint, the table on the right side shows that 700 kilowatt hours, they would see an average monthly increase of $7.96. That's the majority of your revenues and the majority of your customers, of course, are residential. So that's what they would see. Now, general service, they had a 7% increase, and you can see it's relatively flat for all the customers at all different usage levels, between 6 and 7%. If you go to street lighting, it's just flat across the board, 8.5% increase to all the different lighting categories. Security lights, the same thing across the board, 8.5% to each of the categories, types of lights. General service demand, what we did here, if you look down under current, it says all demand. You're currently charging $16.50 per kW of monthly billing demand. We're proposing increasing that by 50 cents to $17, but also to unbundling that charge so that we have the distribution separated from power supply. And of course, then the energy rate would go from approximately 5.3 to about 5.6. 6. Now, when we look at the average increase, if it's 4.5%, and pretty much all customers in this class are going to see around that 4.5%. The general service demand primary, what primary metered customers are is they own their own transformer.
Of course.
26 minutes. I wish I knew what it was. It was gone down like a minute 10 every time.
Oh, that's right, yes.
All right, we're back, Mark.
Okay, hopefully this will be the last.
I was going to say, I
time.
think it'll be the last time.
Yeah. Just one clarification on this, Mike pointed out to me while you had dropped out, is this primary meter, actually we own the transformer, or Lowell owns the transformer. But the reason we have it listed this way is this customer is metered on what's called the high side of the transformer. I'm sorry, the low side of the transformer. So even though they don't own the transformer, we're metering them on the other side of it. Did I say that right? No. We're metering them in front of it.
Yeah, it's a front of the transformer metered at the primary voltage.
Correct, yeah. So that's why you see this rate is a little bit different than this rate, because this customer actually owns their transformer. So if you look at like the proposed demand charge is $16.71, and this one it's $17. And that difference is to recognize that they own their transformer. And this customer is going to see a 5.7% increase. And this customer is going to see a 5.6% increase. So overall, it's relatively a modest increase, a little higher than what we've done in years past. But in looking at this, I know I went through it relatively quickly, but is there any questions or concerns that jumped out at you?
Nope.
I like that we're splitting out the demand.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about unbundling. It's what I would consider an industry best practice at this point, and it definitely increases transparency and also prepares us for continued expansion of behind the meter solar and just distributed energy resources in general. So it's just the next evolution in our rate design.
Yeah. That's a good way of explaining it. We started, we've done work with Lowell since 1998, and we've always had the numbers behind it, the distribution of power supply, but most utilities, Lowell included, they didn't really, it wasn't something that they wanted to complicate the bill, so they wanted to keep it as simple as they could. But the industry is moving in different directions. And like the investor-owned utilities have all unbundled their rates. A lot of the municipals in the state have unbundled their rate. It doesn't change a customer's bill necessarily. It just adds another line to the bill because it's breaking it apart, just to prepare us for future changes.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor, and it's been supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Mark. You can go back to the sunbathing or whatever you're doing down in Florida.
I've been doing a lot of golfing, and I'm pretty sore from it. I'm coming home tomorrow.
Well, maybe you're coming home. We got some big storms coming.
Well, my wife tells me I have to go home.
Okay.
Well, Mark, Mike, we greatly appreciate everything. I'm sure I'll reach out tomorrow at some point, but or in the near future. But greatly appreciate your contributions tonight, and it's been a pleasure working with you as always.
Yep, thanks for the info and
Thank you. Take
answering
care,
our
everybody.
questions.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Okay, moving on. B, review and potential acceptance of the IT services proposal.
All right, so I've got a lot of
Content Proposal.
that.
No?
Oh, I thought. So I've got a lot of information in here, and I can carve this up a lot of different ways, but I'm going to start kind of just at a high level, and if you all want to dive in, we can dive in. But as the board's very aware, we've engaged IP Consultings for pieces of our IT needs. With the dissolution of Adorio, we were left with some additional IT needs, and also as we explored our relationship with IP Consulting as part of the original proposal, not all of the separation of duties were crystal clear, and through the exploration, there were items that fell out of the scope of work. So what's being considered here today is essentially rounding out all of our IT needs through IP Consulting. At the council meeting last Monday, losing track of my weeks, last Monday, City Council approved this. So as the board is aware, we share an IT network with the city. So it took City Council approval and Light and Power board approval to enter into this agreement, but we looked at this a lot of different ways. We considered, what would it look like if we brought somebody in-house? What would it look like if we brought in a different vendor? What if we didn't, what if we pieced out things? There was a lot of different considerations that we looked at, and ultimately we landed on the fact that the IT world is very nuanced and complicated, and there's tremendous benefit of keeping everything under one roof, with one company, so we don't have to worry about what is within the scope of work, what's not in the scope of work. And then we've done some cost checking and some cost evaluation on the work. And again, I can carve that up a lot of different ways, but ultimately what is being presented represents it would bring our two total agreements with IP Consulting combined between the city and Lowell Light and Power to just over $101,000 a year. Mike and I have done a pretty detailed cost-sharing analysis and have determined that, we looked at individual components, but we've agreed that a 60-40 split, 60% city, 40% Lowell Light and Power, is ultimately an equitable split based on a pro rata utilization of the services. And then we're also going to review that on an annual basis, but for the administrative sake, we wanted to establish a set split until things change or to be reviewed periodically. If you look at this, with our previous IT vendors, we were spending about $53,000 a year plus licensing and software expenses. If you looked and tried to do a one-to-one comparison between our previous IT vendors and IP Consulting, those services come out to about $68,000 a year. So we're seeing a little bit of a price increase from services, but the expansion of the service and the quality of the service has gone up tremendously. And the value of those services has gone up. Without getting into all the details, a lot of products and services have been replaced or would be replaced that represent significant improvements over the alternatives in the past. But again, I can carve this up a lot of different ways, but I included a lot of information in the board packet. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but it is our recommendation to accept the proposal being presented by IP Consulting and to authorize me to execute the agreement.
And I would just ask if you have detailed questions that you contact Charlie directly, because a lot of we don't want to a lot of, if there are detailed questions about the security and different things, I think those things need to be discussed privately and not as general information for potential problems, potential scammers, potential hacking, and all that type of information.
Yeah, and some of the stuff that's included in the proposal is definitely security related. Other items are simple endpoint support. My email's not working. My computer keeps giving me a weird message, or it doesn't do things. But yes, there are a lot of there are a lot of security details that are included that would be best kept outside of a public meeting. I would agree.
Yeah, we've talked, I mean, you put a lot of work into this, and, I mean, the result is we are getting a deal. I mean, this is,
I feel very comfortable recommending this proposal. I think Casey and Megan have been very involved with IP consulting, and I think they would echo the sentiment that it has been an absolute breath of fresh air to work with IP consulting, and the confidence that we have with them and the team that we get. One of the biggest things that deterred us from looking at an internal IT person is there is no one person that can replace IP consulting. We have telephone engineers, we have network engineers, we have network architectures, we have Microsoft licensing subject matter experts at our hands. I mean, there's things that, and if we brought IT in-house, I don't necessarily remember exactly, a lot of these expenses don't go away. They're for products. There's yeah, I mean, there's just licensing, there's a cloud-based phone solution. So without getting too deep, I've estimated that to bring IT in-house would cost about double what this is. So that's kind of how I look at this agreement as a labor expense or a deferral of a labor expense. And when you look at it as a labor expense, we could not bring the quality of talent that comes with IP consulting. If we could find them, we couldn't afford them, and it would cost far more than this. So, again, we are very, very comfortable making this recommendation.
So what is the bottom line? What are we approving tonight?
So the bottom line would be to approve the proposal presented by IP Consulting and authorize me to execute that proposal.
So moved.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any further questions?
Terry,
What's the
do you
length of
know
it?
if us, the city, or you have a, what am I thinking, a policy on networking? What's allowed, not allowed? I mean, we had to put in a thing in ours, outside thumb drives, when a vendor comes in. What do you do to make sure that that vendor's is not bringing in some form of a thing? Maybe these can be taken offline, but I'll be addressing those with Mr. Burns throughout,
Yes.
is my concerns. But
And that's one of the things we are looking to shore up is formalizing some of the practices that we have. You know, I'll say I don't want to get into cybersecurity too
Right,
much,
exactly.
but I would say that we adhere to best practices, but not all best practices are incorporated into official policies. So we will be looking to work with IP Consulting to formalize some of those policies and get some concrete meat and potatoes on the plate. Yes.
sorry, Andy.
I was just gonna ask, is this the 1 year?
Oh, sorry. So it's kind of goofy because we signed the original agreement. Basically, what we're going to do is align this agreement to coincide with the other. At the end of that, it would all roll into a single comprehensive agreement, but we kind of piecemealed it together. So technically, it will be a 5-year deal, but it will coincide with the original 5-year managed service contract that was approved in the spring.
Okay.
So it's off by
like
about a half a
4.5
year.
year
Yeah,
then?
this
Okay.
is kind of a 4.5-year
Okay.
thing.
Okay. It's been motion and support. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. On to
Invenergy Calhoun.
Calhoun. So we approved this at our last board meeting, but it was found out that it was missing year 15. We didn't catch that. I know
Nobody did.
Tina and Andrew weren't here. I know you guys would have caught it. But the rest of us didn't. So we just, everything's pretty much the same. It's just adding year 15 in there. And we thought it was best to go through that and approve that with the year 15 included in there. It's kind of like elevators, you know, they don't have floor 13, you know, it's usually not on there. So
This year 15. Yeah, and it went through,
But this does have a year 13, right?
yes, yeah, no, we swapped those two, nothing changed, no, yeah. Yeah, this is really just an administrative change, that because this is a long-lasting contract, we wanted to make sure that there was no ifs, ands, or buts, no doubts. It's 100% what you all approved is what's going to be implemented, so it's really a formality.
okay, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the amendment to the purchase power agreement.
Supported.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. On to informational items.
All right.
You know, when the chairman really is,
I like it.
he got something he wants to do, he's,
All right, so I want to start with tomorrow. We have
Scheduled meeting.
last thing. Tomorrow there are 2 board member birthdays, and want to say happy birthday to our chairperson and Craig. There was a birthday that was missed during our last board meeting, but I'm pretty sure I was threatened if I brought it up, so I'm going to leave, that person will remain nameless, but happy birthday to all board members. There's a happy birthday cake over there. Please grab a piece
Thank
on your
you.
way out. On to informational items. And I'll roll through some of these. Again, performance data is a lot of the same. What we're seeing is decrease in sales in a lot of areas and increase in revenue. It's a direct reflection of the PCA getting fully implemented and starting to catch up and being caught up. The one piece that I will highlight is there is a new graph in here, a few pages down. This was a product of, it came out of my manager's report, but as we implemented the PCA, we started tracking, obviously we started tracking what that PCA was, wanted to represent that to the board. So I asked Megan to pull together this graph, and the green line is what the green line correlates with the left axis, that is the per kilowatt hour charge that kind of shows you relative to the PCA what that change is. Then in the red line is total PCA revenue by month, and those numbers will obviously fluctuate a little bit based on, or they'll deviate and come together and separate based on number of kilowatt hours sold, but we're looking forward to seeing the other end of this graph when it starts to come back down. So,
Very cool.
Extra like 13% on the month.
yeah, it's significant.
Yeah.
That's why that's one of the reasons I wanted to highlight the dual axis and put that total revenue, because you see just how impacted we've been by rising power costs. So with that,
will you go to the inactive and
this one,
delinquent, yeah. So,
or the bar graph.
I guess maybe it's the delinquent. So what I'm seeing is
Yeah.
we're getting some big spikes here. I'm assuming that was
That was
somebody that left town.
It was mostly one customer.
Right,
Yes.
but again, they paid all of it or a portion of it?
Portion.
Okay, and so then then it's jumped back up? Is that another, I'm just, yeah.
I'm not sure if they're what the cause was for last month. I don't remember one specific customer.
Okay,
Unfortunately, you are seeing that slight upward trend, but that's also to be expected as our customer grows. So, that line, I'd rather it not be that way. I like the trend line on the disconnected service orders far better. But with the PCA, with power costs going up, with customer growth, I've said it 3 years now. At some point, we can't continue to maintain basement below the basement, under the foundation, bad debt write-offs. But we're going to keep trying.
and are we are now in that period, what's the period of we can't shut off?
We are currently in that period.
And that goes till,
April 15th.
April, yes.
okay,
I can't believe I can get that number.
well,
The date, I figured I'd be off by a week or two.
We're doing pretty well, I mean, considering our revenue as opposed to what's unpaid, I mean, I would say we're doing pretty well.
We exceed all industry averages, not by little, but somewhere. But it's all subject to change too. I can't say that we have visibility into what next year's bad debt could potentially be, and I don't think anybody has any heartburn over it. Megan agrees. She gets heartburn before me.
okay.
It's kind of like a reliability, right, where once in a while we have an issue, a storm, but for the most part,
It's the trend that,
Yeah.
I would agree.
That's the only I want to
All right.
ask questions about.
I will hand it over to Ryan for the outage report.
Not too bad this past month. There was just the normal, pretty much the normal stuff. We had a broken porcelain cutout and a tree limb, kind of all in the same location out on 28th Pratt Lake. The Avery location, the wind was blowing pretty good that day, so it just wiggled a wire enough to where it broke it loose and failed. The connection failed and caused that one to be off. Tree issue at Quarry Lane, a squirrel at the 28th Street location, another tree issue at 28th Street was actually, that was a tree. Trees blowing around that day, and then just a failed fuse at Plum Street. Really, really old, aged out cutout. The fuse was probably in really bad shape. It just really didn't have any reason other than it just got old. So
One thing
All
I
of that activity, most of that activity is like on the periphery of our system.
Yep.
And how old is most of that infrastructure out, 28th, Pratt Lake, all that old?
it's pretty old. There's a fair amount of it that's pretty old. This January, we're planning on, coming right up next month, we're planning on mowing a lot of that area with the forestry mulcher and doing a lot of squirrel guarding and some utility switch replacements out there, just upgrading things. It's been on our radar for a long time. We're just trying to put it all together. So hopefully this January we'll get it taken care of. Should help out with a lot of the problems out in that area. It's out in the country. The wind blows. There's lots of trees. It's just busy.
And I want to highlight the duration of all those outages. To have every outage that comes in, it's not going to happen every time, but to keep that average restoration time to under an hour. There's one of the metrics, the outage metrics, and I can't think of it, but it's the average duration of outages if you experienced an outage. I can say our nearest competitor's metric was somewhere around 300 minutes. That's a really good indication of the people element, not necessarily the infrastructure. I mean, the people manage the infrastructure, but it's the guys that get out there and get the lights turned back on, and that right there is definitely a reflection of how responsive we are.
Is
Well, that
that
includes-
related to response time is when they show up or when it first came and
That
then
is-
it's back
No,
on?
That is from
Power off to
meter
on.
off to meter on.
So if they have to drive 20 minutes, that's included in that?
They gotta drive out,
Yeah.
assess the situation, come back, and then go fix it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a though, and again, that's not gonna happen every month, but that's something that really is reflective of having, you know, a really high-quality staff.
I think the other really amazing thing to point out is, you know, these don't happen during the day on weekday. This is weekend, nighttime.
I wish we could make outages happen 9 to 5,
Yeah.
Monday through Friday, but I'm pretty sure.
During a board meeting.
Yeah.
Wasn't there one that we had?
Yeah, I was gonna say, a couple months ago, Ryan had to go help out, so.
That's amazing response time when
Yeah.
people are at home.
Yeah, I wanna say, there's something to be proud of there, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Bravo.
that's impressive.
You may roll on, Perry. Roll on.
Roll on, Davey.
All right. Now, we'll go to the income statement. I'm not going to hit on the income statement too much. Again, it's the same things. I will say that Megan will be joining us again in February. The plan will be to take the rate action that was adopted today and bake that into a modified projection of the remainder of the year to try to give the board a little visibility into what impact that would have. We took a very conservative approach to the budget this year, and it just wasn't conservative enough. Part of it, but we're going to take that. We've made some cuts to the budget. We've, taken some steps to reduce our expenses, taken steps to maximize investment income. So we'll model some of those changes and get that back in front of the board in February when Megan joins us again. And she'll also present, or we will present some fiscal year-end metrics that now that we've got the audit wrapped up and everything. So any questions, happy to answer them, but other than that, we will roll on. The income statement's subject to change. Capital projects, nothing really new to report. It's kind of steady as it goes. We've wrapped up some of the smaller projects. Office roof replacement over us right now. Some different things have been wrapped up. We've got materials ordered for phase one of bringing the new feet over here, but with pulling the contract work out of the budget this current year, there's just going to be some expenses that trickle in. We've got some equipment ordered, cap banks and different things. So we're kind of in a holding pattern-ish right now on the capital budget, waiting for materials and other projects to kick off. So we'll have the standby generator at the warehouse coming in February-ish, and then materials will come in, and as materials for Across the River come in, we will be paying those invoices, and that'll be reflected in the capital budget. Manager's report, I do have a couple things that are not written here. Please review it. There was a lot of information in this manager's report, I feel like, but a couple MPPA notes. This was a really busy month. Casey and I did participate in a landfill gas project committee meeting, and with the developments in renewable natural gas, there has been increased interest in terminating one particular landfill gas agreement that we have and repurposing that facility to a renewable natural gas facility. The landfill gas is our highest firm committed resource. There was some interest earlier in the fiscal year, late last summer, early fall, but it involved us buying out the contract, and we weren't necessarily interested in spending money to get out of a bad contract. But it did pan out. But there were other issues with replacement renewable power, potential for renewable portfolio standards, so it wasn't as attractive. Now the solar projects are moving along a little bit better. We have a little more visibility into what it's going to take to bring the pending solar projects to the grid, and there's no more buyout of the contract. So should that come to the board, I wanted to give the board a heads up and provide some initial feedback from staff's perspective and MPPA's perspective. If you have issues or see concerns with that potential, please reach out to me, because I will take silence as a assumed support at this point. Well, it's an MPPA recommendation. They're vetting it. The board has been very supportive of allowing MPPA to vet options and deals and make recommendations. We vet, our staff, Casey and I, we vet all the, and review all the recommendations. So I've seen nothing that would indicate that we need to take a different approach, and neither has Casey. So again, though, if you have individual concerns, please reach out to me. Let's see, where am I at? Also need to review there's potentially going to be bringing to the board in the next few months a battery storage investment opportunity. It would be something that we're excited for. It's a capacity-only transaction, so it would help shore up our capacity requirement, our reliability requirement, and will play a pretty significant role in the first 3 years. What we're seeing, a significant role in the first 3 years in helping replace some of our future short capacity position, and then we would peel off and be a smaller off-taker for the remainder of the 10-year contract. The rates that we're seeing are better economically than the bilateral transactions for similar capacity resources. The biggest thing for MPPA with this opportunity is visibility into the education side of it. It takes a lot of insider knowledge and insight to have a full understanding of the revenue streams that can be captured through a battery storage opportunity. So one of the critical aspects is a partnership between MPPA and the developer from an educational standpoint, and it would give MPPA quite a bit of visibility into battery storage opportunities, and it's kind of the opportunity to dip your toe in before jumping all the way in. So MPPA has asked for all the members to gauge board potential interest. Again, we're going to be very supportive. If for some reason you have issues with this opportunity, please reach out to me. But again, it's something that I have indicated to MPPA that our board is typically very supportive of their analyses, and I've reviewed them, and Casey and I are actually meeting with MPPA tomorrow to get a little better understanding of how this and all the different moving pieces of our long-term power supply portfolio are starting to shape up now that Campbell 3 has a definitive end-of-life date. DTE has filed an integrated resource plan that indicates they're planning to refuel the Bell River power plant, and now MISO's transition to seasonally accredited capacity. With all those moving parts, we're starting to get some visibility into what our long-term power supply is going to look like. Couple other items I want to touch on. The Line Shack sale. So in my memo, or in the manager's report, I report that City Council voted 4-1 to approve a resolution that will allow the city to enter into or to start negotiating a purchase and development agreement with Todd Shaw and the Estes Group. So the vote does not complete the sale. It just initiates the next step of the process, which is negotiating a purchase and development deal. I believe I'm going to be a participant in that agreement. Again, if there's any individual concerns that you have or any individual items that you feel should be addressed in the purchase and development agreement, please reach out to me. I've been in contact with Jessica. I know Mike's been in contact with Jessica. We've started some conversations on how we best feel that could be handled. Again, I don't think we should, that's a contract, so we shouldn't necessarily take a deep dive into individual provisions in a public meeting. But please reach out to me if you see things that you'd like to see addressed. Another thing that's not included in here, but I wanted to highlight is we're going to do, I think it's shaping up and we're pretty sure we're going to be able to pull it together, but we're going to utilize the new wood chipper for a Christmas tree recycling program. And we just kind of starting it, but the Weggy Center, is that how you pronounce that? The Weggy Center they used to do it, and they would chip up Christmas trees and use them for their trails. So we're looking at bringing that drop-off location to the fairgrounds, so it serves our customers a little bit easier.
Is that the reason why they discontinued it? Because
No.
the cost of the chipper, or what?
Yeah, they discontinued it because it was a free chipper that was being donated to them, and it's not anymore. We didn't know that until today.
Okay.
Depending on how it goes this year, we may look at partnering with them next year, since we have a chipper and they stopped the program because they don't have a chipper. We haven't explored that, and that would be something that would come to the board. There's
That's huge. That's great.
there's some challenges to that, but Perry and I were actually just discussing it today. There's some things that we could do, but I like the idea of having a central drop-off location in town, because I think it really serves our customers. And it'll be
Have
fun.
that pile of ugly trees out there at the Weggy Center.
Yeah, well, it's only gonna be there for a few days, and then we're gonna. That's about how fast.
Bah humbug.
Yeah, that's about how fast.
Christmas tree. They need love too.
Christmas tree.
All of a sudden, we're gonna have a 24-foot spruce tree in our pile. You're gonna see a spruce tree getting drove down the road.
It's gonna happen.
I've got 3 of them in my yard now. I got 3.
Ryan, keep an eye out on abnormally large Christmas trees.
And I want you to save all the little ornaments that people
Yeah.
forget to, or miss when they take them off.
You're gonna put them up in here? Yeah.
How big a round can you stick in that chipper?
16
Round,
inch.
big.
Ooh.
It sucks in mid.
Yeah.
Don't have your toes by it.
But yeah, everybody's heard of rails to trails. I know you have. This is kind of trees to trails.
Right. I love this idea.
I think Perry brought this up
Thank
to
you,
me probably 2 years ago. And with the old chipper, it wasn't necessarily feasible. As soon as we got the new chipper, I called him and said I'd like to do it next year, and it almost got kicked down the road due to COVID this year and limited planning opportunities. But Ryan, Lisa, and Emily, we all met today, and I think we can pull it together. Looking at drop off between January 1st and January 10th, with chipping the trees up just after that. So to give about a week and a half roughly to allow people to pile them up before we send them through and make little pieces out of them.
That'll make the garage smell nice, right?
Yeah, I would say Ryan will do it on a Friday, park the truck in the barn and call it good.
Yep.
The only other thing I'm going to touch on in the manager's report is anniversaries. I'd like to highlight those. Hillary celebrated her 2-year work anniversary in November, and she's been almost immediately has become a tremendous asset and has jumped right in as just an amazing asset for the team. You all are aware I celebrated a 2-year anniversary as well.
God, has it been 2 years?
2 years.
The impact hasn't been quite so immediate, huh?
Yeah. I like to draw it out a little bit. I'm having fun though. I mean,
Yeah.
it says that I'm having fun.
Yeah.
Come on.
Right.
We'll roll through a couple pictures here. Just want to highlight. I'm still it's really exciting that we have somebody here and that we have the concrete capabilities that we do in house. Mark getting ready for the generator pad.
Didn't get the whole staff to put a handprint in there.
Ryan would have suspended somebody.
Finish, guys.
You go.
Every concrete guy hates that.
He wanted to drill holes in the brand new pavement and brace up that sideboard, and I'm like, nope, you go get them concrete things out there and use that to brace off of there, because you're not putting new holes in our brand new pavement.
That's a good idea. I didn't notice that that's what those were for. Now, the next picture, just want to highlight, Perry wasn't sure what we've included this one for, but I want to highlight the challenges and the amazing work that Ryan and them do. Those two trees in the middle of the picture are what the picture is in here for. This is things that we deal with, or Ryan deals with, and the guys on a regular basis. Those trees won't be a problem for a long time. But
They will be a
but
problem.
they will
someday.
be a problem one day. So Ryan is taking a very proactive approach in trying to minimize this, and I just wanted to highlight that because those are typically unpleasant conversations, but they're the necessary conversations that make a utility premier utility. I have been other places and worked with other people that would turn their back on that and say, I'm never going to have to worry about that before I retire. But that's not the attitude that we take, and I thought this was a great picture to include, how just some small trees will cause a
So
major
my
issue.
question is,
Godfrey and Lincoln Lake.
so
What is this building?
It's the new.
The new YMCA, Old Impact Church.
that's obviously in the right of way. So are they new plantings?
No, I don't know if they grew there on their own or if they were planted there by impact or planted, I don't know how.
They look
ended
like
up
they
being
were
there, but-
planted.
So they weren't, that's not, the Ys,
No,
they were there before,
yep.
that they took ownership,
Is
just
that in
didn't
the city
really
or
notice it.
Virgins?
huh?
Is that in the city or Virgins?
I don't know
I
where
know the
that
dividing line's
They
right
give us
there.
more- the bulk
I'm
of
not
the
sure.
problems if we don't just do something now.
Well,
So what did you do with them now?
Nothing, we gotta stop and talk with it, cause I just took the photo and I haven't done
Well,
anything
pine
with it
trees
yet,
are about
but
40
we need
years.
to do that.
Yeah, those
Forty
go
years,
fast.
we'll have trouble with them.
Yeah, I would say it's one of them things that you deal with it now, or you kick the can down the road and the problem's always bigger.
Oh,
So
there you go.
Yeah.
Christmas trees.
yeah, come down,
That
call them
was a
Christmas
great-
tree.
that was great.
Yeah.
I'll take
Take the chipper on the way
It sounded
out.
like it was a lot of people.
Yeah, I was-
A lot of people, there
I was not able to attend the Christmas parade, but the Christmas parade was a huge success.
It was.
There you go.
Then we'll check.
Cute.
There were a lot of,
Everybody back.
This is just a picture. We're starting to see a little more, starting to see a pickup on install of solar systems. So I thought this was an interesting picture because you start to get an idea of just how busy it becomes. But again, just for your kind of information, this is what some of the warnings look like, some of the additional equipment. But we are starting to see a pickup. We had one installer install 2 systems over the last few months. So we're working through the interconnection process, and we're meeting and making some tweaks as we implement and utilize a policy that's on the books. We're tweaking just the processes to streamline it and just make sure we're not taking for granted that we got something in place, great, move on.
Is that a proper
So what-
ground for the phone? Is that a phone company ground? That green wire, I believe that's what that
Probably,
is.
Yeah, for AT&T.
What, they couldn't pound in a ground rod?
So what-
It's hard to say.
so why all the warnings about the rapid shutdown, or what is that,
What's that?
what does that mean?
So to be, what's the code? IEEE 1547 compliant, which is the standard that they comply to. There's a rapid shutdown provision, so the inverters are specifically designed as grid tie inverters. They look for the sine wave to match up to. Without that sine wave, they have to, by spec, immediately, basically almost immediately reduce current to like a milliamp or something. It's a very, very quick requirement, and it's just a safety requirement, so it's not like a capacitor that slowly bleeds off back, slowly discharges back into, and can energize something that's dead. This is basically, as soon as the lights go off, that has to stop producing power.
So it's just letting anyone know that's working on it that when it's shut down, they don't have to wait till it's safe or.
I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure the specific reason that one sticker is on there, but that's what it's referring to.
Okay,
But
'cause I
I-
kind of see it in a few spots where it's like rapid shutdown, and so like, must be
Yeah.
important, whatever it means.
Yes. Next picture is just thought this was a cool picture. Ryan showed it to me. This is a very big change. Starting to really get settled in. Holes are in the bunks. All the in the background, all the concrete cast vaults are all lined up. It just, the guys do a really good job making sure we keep nice stuff nice. So wanted to show the board that how the money that you all are approving is being
That's the best
utilized.
I've ever seen that.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I can't believe that.
I mean,
Where is that?
That's, yeah, it's just.
Do we have a basketball hoop there?
No.
Okay, sorry.
No, we cannot have a basketball hoop on.
We're gonna invite
company
Becker back
sorry.
to town, we're gonna host
I
it
played
here.
good horse.
So that's the manager's report. Next thing on the list is the policy for review. It's termination for non-payment. I asked Julie did or somebody before I got here, did a board education session or board training session on our disconnect policy a few years ago. I've asked Julie to dust that off, update it, and do a presentation again next month. So next month we'll have a board training session on disconnect for termination for non-payment policy and procedure and how we go about it. So wanted to put it out there for review, but we will take a little bit of a deeper dive next month. Other than that, just the schedule of meetings. We'll note that the city council meeting next Monday has been canceled.
Cool.
So enjoy your week off, Jim.
Question. Are you guys gonna shut like the office for like a Christmas and crap and all that?
We are going to do an after Christmas lunch at some point. And Whitney and I do something around Christmas every year. Like last year we did the breakfast. This year we're looking at doing a lunch on a Friday, but she's only off on Fridays. So I looked at the calendar and there was not a Friday between Thanksgiving and the New Year that our entire staff was going to be in. So after I saw that, I just said we will do something after the holidays from us to show our appreciation for the amazing staff, board, and community support, city support.
Do you guys get to leave early on Christmas Eve?
We are
Closed.
We are closed Christmas Eve. We shut down the office a little bit early on a lot of days before long weekends, but I don't feel like we can justify it this year because Christmas is on a Sunday, Christmas Eve is on a Saturday, so we will observe Christmas Eve on Friday and Christmas Day on Monday, so we'll get a 4-day weekend.
Good.
Now when it goes back to the middle of the week, I like to shut the office down a couple hours early to give people a little extra time to spend with their families around the holiday.
Get the cooking done.
I would say we do it every year for Thanksgiving. I like to do it for Thanksgiving and then this kind of the start and end of summer, those long weekends, let people bail out. And I always talk to Perry and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
So, but this year, I think we're going to work full day up to. I'm seeing some disappointed.
That is news to me.
I told managers. I told everybody 2 weeks
You're
ago.
getting Friday off.
I'm just kidding.
I told everybody 2 weeks ago. That's all I have for informational items.
Super cool.
Board comment. Daniel.
I got nothing.
Happy birthday,
Happy
Harry.
birthday. Tina.
Well, I wasn't finished.
Hey, Tom, we're already 5 minutes over.
You got the good part. That's great. We're good.
Okay. Quickly, yeah, I saw our newest employee, Tony Comer, at the Lowell Museum Christmas party on Wednesday, and was able to give him a nice welcome to Lowell Lake Power. Sounds like it's going to be a great addition of a position, one that you're kind of creating over time. That
Yeah, and I glossed over that a little too fast. I forgot that was included in there. I do want to stop and revisit the manager's report briefly and officially welcome Tony. I think everybody knows Tony. We interviewed, Tony was very interested in, like you had mentioned, this new position. We're not necessarily replacing Ron's position, 1 for 1. You can't replace 25 years in his background. So Ryan and I worked together to identify what the best solution would be for the holes that are being created, and Tony he's hit the ground running. He started on Monday. 2 days in, I've had a couple interactions with him. He's just a great guy, brings an amazing attitude, amazing commitment to the community, and a very valuable background and an ability to learn and take on new things. And again, he's hit the ground running. He's been working with Ron, and Ron's got nothing but good things to say about him so far. So we kind of knew what we were getting with him.
Yeah.
So thank you for reminding me. I glossed up, the voice had me gloss over that piece a little too fast.
And the other thing in my world, of course, is Fallisburg. I'd like to mention that because, well, that's a big part of my life. We were back at the schoolhouse this year for the annual Christmas party. And that helped out by the $13,250 grant we got from the Lowell Area Community Foundation for a new heating system. So that was a big part of it. And also, I mean, COVID messed with us for a couple of years, but we're back. We've got a new system in there that's keeping the place warm, and look forward to next year's Christmas party ramping up even more.
Dina,
I have nothing.
Andrew,
Well, I do have something. So if you guys could remind me, where do we stand with the engine room?
Exactly where we
That's gonna
were.
be
Is it-
my cool wreck-a-bop work.
Honestly, with the with the last we talked was
There's holes that you can fall through.
yeah, we backed it out of the capital budget and had plans to revisit mid-budget year, hoping that our conservative approach to the budget would free up some funds. Obviously, that has not materialized. So we're still pretty much in a holding pattern, and the cost to replace, the cost of steel, cost of labor has continued to stay through the roof. So to be honest with you, we have not made any moves on it, and currently right now it's not on the radar to move that ball forward.
Okay. The reason I just brought it up is that I know that the high school robotics team, I guess, is looking for a workspace. And middle school team, I should say, because that's where my involvement comes in. But I was just wondering if that's something that might be
Too many safety issues.
probably.
Right
I want to help. I mean, we invited the Lego team in, and it was like a robotics type of thing. So I would
First Lego
love.
League.
Yes, I would love to find a way to support. We can talk offline. I would
Mhm.
like to talk offline, and I'd like to include Casey if there's anything that we can do to get involved. Very cool thing,
That'd be so
and
cool.
very much aligned with
Yeah.
us and who we are, and giving back to the community and serving the community that we serve. So let's chat
we
offline.
can-
I would like to explore what we could potentially do.
Okay. Because that's my thought, is if there was something that was going on with that engine room, I just wanted to make sure the board was okay with me kind of asking about that for the robotics team. But,
I'm glad.
I
I just think it's cool we have a
That's
robotics
cool.
team.
Yeah, well, we have brand new this year is the middle school robotics team that my older son's part of, that I was mentoring for. Had a competition this past weekend.
Is it a competitive advantage to have a rocket scientist mentor? I gotta believe that.
Not if they
Depends on what
don't, not
you
if they're
make
not
it.
fluent in coding, but.
That's so cool.
But, no, it was a very fun experience this past, since October when we started. But yeah, the high school's had a team for like 12 years, I think now or so, but, and they do a lot more serious work. It's a little more kit built for the middle school, small 18-inch robot, but, all the same, as mentors, we kind of have a policy of we don't want to build anything. We might help hold something for you, but kind of want them to do the building. They write the code. We might advise them. So it's very, very cool thing. And I heard that they were looking for a permanent solution to our current science classroom that we kind of borrow once in a while to do as a workspace. But they'd love to have just a space they could kind of leave stuff in. It's like, maybe we've got something like that. Maybe, the engine room came to mind, and so that's where that came up. So, and of course, it would be a sponsorship type of opportunity for Light Power as well. So, we can talk more.
Yeah, sorry, my brain got the gears going.
Yep.
My robot's spinning out, so.
Yeah. Robots running low on batteries. Yeah, that's all I have.
Well, when we go back into session on January 3rd, a lot of times at the beginning of the year, we maybe look at switching boards or get an opportunity to move to a different board. I'd like to stay with the city of the Lowell Power Board. I don't know if that'll be a possibility. If not, I'll be here on the 10th, and if not, I'll let you know who would take that over on the 3rd. But it's been a pleasure to sit here and learn.
Cool.
Okay. Comments that I have, yeah, great to have Tony aboard. Happy holidays. Just be, not doom and gloom, but just be aware of your settings and different things with all the flu and COVID and everything that's still out there and still affecting many people. The last thing I'll say, and I'm saying this because I want Ryan to know, I'm gonna quickly find out how much influence I have or not, because I'm going to, in the new year, I am going to make a point of inviting one of each month, I'll be contacting a lineman or a groundkeeper, ground worker or whatever, and asking, it's not mandatory, but just asking if they would attend a board meeting. So, with that.
Would that apply to office staff too? Or
Huh?
Invite the
Well,
office staff
I mean,
as well?
that, because, yes, I mean, I want, for me, I would like the board to get to know, I mean, I know because of the things that I've gone to, being the chairman, I'm here in the building a lot, so I've gotten to know most of the staff here, and I've gone to, we used to, before COVID, would attend Lyman's Rodeo and get to know, most all the employees over there know me, but I'm not sure if Jared or if Steve walked in here, if he's met you or Tina. And I just think I think it's important that the staff gets to know the board a little bit and know what we do. I mean, we're not trying to blow horns, but I believe that this board and the boards previously are a part of the success of Lowell Light and Power. And I've said this from the beginning, it's a family, it's a team that goes from the board to the general manager to the distribution manager to the lowest person on the totem pole. And that's what makes Lowell Light and Power tick, and that's what makes us a premier utility. And I just we'll see what influence I have or not. I might find out you don't have crap or influence.
Almost did.
So, with that,
Good timing.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So motion.
Support. Oh, go ahead.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those that are opposed can stay.